okay, if I'm 48 kilos today, can I be 47 kilos in the next 3 days? And then if I can I be 46 kilos? In my head, when I was seeing my reflection, I wasn't unhealthy. I didn't look sickly thin. I looked fit and great. Like my brain could tell me that I looked super healthy. That's what I saw.
This is MindBody Matters with Greg Rennie and Rob Reeford.
Welcome, podcast listeners. This is MindBody Matters, where we talk about all matters of the mind and body. And here's my producer, and I wish you would see him on video, but we're just do audio, and Rob's bouncing up and down. You look like a bobblehead, actually, to be honest.
I'm just having fun.
Just having fun? Okay.
I'm trying to have fun.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it did look like a bobblehead.
Yeah. If people could only see what we're doing. But again, that's what I got into radio, because radio is such a visual medium and all that.
Yes, we have a face for radio, as they say.
Yes, right? That's and I sure do. Anyway, how are you?
I'm doing well. Let's get into this. Let's do the intro for this episode, because I'm really excited about talking with her.
Yes.
Jamie Meyer is on the show today, and she's a freelance business consultant. And on her website, she calls herself a world traveler and a traveling entrepreneur. Down under, she has done a lot in business. I got to tell you, she was 27 when she started a company. And she would replicate that 3 times before turning 34. So she established her first company at 27, and then she would replicate these business ventures 3 times. A company that she has called Carat back in 2019 was considered to be the SME Business of the Year. She reached out to us, interested in being on the show, and I thought it was wonderful. And our quick phone call that we had a while ago, I thought she would talk about her business, but what you wanted to talk about is not her world traveling, but her traveling based on her past experiences and sharing her travel, sharing her journey regarding eating disorders and how she overcame that to become the business person she is today. So quite excited about having her in the studio today. Here's Jamie Meyer. What occurs to me, and thankfully has happened, is that you reached out to us to talk to us about your personal journey. But you have like a wide amount of business experience and a number of companies that you have. What motivated you to contact us to talk to us about your personal story instead of having a podcast about business?
I mean, I don't really generally like to talk about my business too much on a podcast.
Oh, really? A lot of people do. Most people do.
I like to talk about business on a podcast and use my business as the experience I have through my business as examples for people, things that they should watch out for, places they can explore. I like to use that experience, but I don't actually like to talk about my business generally. But the one thing that I know about my business is that it was crucial for me to do a lot of internal work and understanding to step up to the plate that I wanted to create. So when I started my business, it was 100 times too big so I could grow into it. And growing into it required me to grow up and do a lot of things and learn a lot of things about myself and learn tools that I didn't have when I started it. So that's sort of why your podcast was super interesting, because through that journey, I recognized that there is so much of a connection between what we're internally experiencing, our physiology. So I'm going to start again, in our body. Let's just go within our body. And our emotional scale. I don't know why I couldn't get that out. And then, you have a platform specifically to discuss how that's interconnected, what that means. And I have a personal story of what it looks like to ignore that and not understand that, and then regenerate a connection between the two.
How do you see the connection? I mean, we talked about this in our pre-interview, is that very often, and for many different reasons, we see mind and body separate. So you have a lot of personal experience to see that they're interconnected. How would you define or describe the mind-body connection?
A lot of people would disagree with me on this, but this is truly what I believe. Everything that exists in our body comes from our mental scope. Every tweak, niggle, illness, all of that comes from our mental and emotional scope. That is how connected we are.
Interdependent, would you say?
I think the mental and emotional stimulates the trigger in the body. So the body is triggered, or that we store the mental and emotional in our body until our body cannot cope with that anymore. And then there's something within our body manifests from that experience.
I think it's a discussion a lot of people are having. And once I started realizing that a lot of people are talking about mind-body connection, one of the most popular books right now is Bessel van der Kolk, and The Body Keeps the Score. That comes up a lot in these interviews. Share your personal story, how you got to the point where you had a personal understanding of the interconnectedness, but also just helped you kind of not redefine, but have a different perception of yourself and others and the world. Where did this all start?
It started by accident. Let's say by accident. So from the time I was between 13 and 24, I was forever sick with something. So at 13, I had a swimming competition. And it was like the high levels, all school, Catholic regional kind of swimming competition. That whole day leading up to that competition, I felt terribly ill, like kind of like stomach flu, should not be going to compete. And I remember standing on the block. I had to wait from like 7 p.m. when the meet started until 9:30 to be in my race. So I was sitting there and convincing myself I wasn't going to throw up. And I remember standing on the starting block, waiting for the relay, because I was in the relay, waiting for the person in front of me to hit the standing block. And I thought to myself, if you don't hurry up, I'm going to hurl in the pool.
Oh.
And she hit the wall. And I didn't even think about it. I dived 3/4 of the way deep down the pool. Swam my personal best time, did not even wait to see where we got. I threw myself out of the pool and ran to the bathroom. And so, you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you that is, a stomach bug. And I've, got over it. I got over the harshness of it in 3 days, but the constant need to, or feeling of needing to be sick remained for 3, 4, maybe probably even 5 years, really. So I would be hungry and then go to make food, and the smell of the food would turn me off eating completely. And when I wouldn't often be hungry. So, getting to that point was always a big deal. And then anything that happened outside of my normal sphere of my day would automatically crank my anxiety and increase the amount of nausea I was feeling. Even in Australia, they have medication for a nausea to suppress the nausea feeling. I was on that. I still would not ease completely. Like, I would still have this underlying consistent set of nausea. And after such a long period of time, and at that age, you kind of just, this is your new normal. You sort of adapt and just feels completely normal. Then I started having panic attacks. It's like severe panic attacks. I actually remember I think it was the 9th or 10th grade, I thought I had a heart condition because my panic attacks would be so violently strong. And I had no idea what a panic attack even was. And at the point, like by the time you finish seeing all the doctors for the nausea that you're experiencing, the psychiatrist that they send you to, you're definitely not going to tell anybody you think you have a heart condition because you're going to be poked and prodded or sent to a mental institution. I don't think I told... I mean, people at school found out because I was, I'd be sitting in class and like clutch my chest like I was having a heart attack. But, I never told my mum. I never told anybody that could actually take me to go and be seen about it, or who was adult enough to tell me that I was having a panic attack. And so then, between sort of 17 when I finished high school and 21, a lot of things happened. I got my first job. I went and studied for a little while, got my first job, had a long-term boyfriend at that point, and made several mistakes early on there, and ended up gaining a significant amount of weight. And it wasn't hugely, it wasn't health concerning significant amount of weight, but I was quite petite and small, and I sort of came out of that space. And fast forward probably 4 years from there, I'm 23, I'm getting married, and I'm pretty much numb. Everything my whole body is numb. I remember thinking on my wedding day, why can you not feel anything? If somebody had put a hot poker on my body, I would not have noticed. So not even a year later, I'm like, I don't know. I'm actually not 100% sure what triggered the response to the situation that I was in, but I got to a point where I couldn't be in that situation anymore, and told my husband that I wanted a divorce. And 3 days later, I had dropped 50 pounds. Did not feel sick for a whole 24 hours. I did not have a headache. I did not have a panic attack. I did not have anxiety. I had nothing. It just disappeared. It was like the most magical thing I can describe to you. I just woke up one day and felt 5 years old again. It was incredible.
Was that related to like the stress of going into a marriage at that age? Was it because of the person you were with? Any idea on why there was this change?
So my closest synopsis of what happened was I was bullied a lot at school, and the perception of my family life that I had was that I was kind of an outsider and I wasn't really welcome. And so that perception then fueled being bullied at school, because you sort of put yourself, and I'm not saying that anybody gets bullied intentionally puts themselves in a position where they're attacked, but you feed that need to be abused in some way, because it's how you feel about yourself, because you're always seeking something to solidify your opinion of yourself. So you go through that, and then the relationships that I were in further exacerbated that. So leaving my husband was essentially leaving the part of me that needed that constant reassurance that I was an outsider and I wasn't good enough and I couldn't, I had to justify existing, because essentially that was the perception I'd had of myself probably since I was 9 years old, if I track it back. So leaving him was saying no to all of that, and all of the trauma from that, all the experiences from that, all the parts of myself that I would hurt and destroy internally had an opportunity to heal, because they were not in those positions anymore. They were not berated by that same stimuli that would create the anxiety and the weight gain and the nausea and headaches, and the list goes on. There were so many things. For a young woman, I was very, very unwell, but I was so conditioned to be unwell, I didn't realize how unwell I was and how good I could feel.
Describe the numbness. Any thoughts on what that was?
Looking back, it was definitely a coping mechanism, because I knew leading up to actually getting married that I shouldn't have been there, but I am the sort of person where I'll see something all the way through, because if I don't, then I won't know whether I should have or I shouldn't have. So I had made a commitment. I was going to see the commitment through, and I had a lot of hopes that becoming a wife was going to change my relationship. I don't know where I got that from, but I had this idea.
There's that conditioning.
Yeah, I can't sort of pinpoint it, but there was definitely, women sort of, or some women have the idea that once they become a wife, there's a certain level of respect that they get. There's a certain level of equality that they get with their partner. You're the wife. There's a level of prestige that's supposed to come with that, just the same as when you're a husband. And that didn't happen, and it doesn't happen, right? If that doesn't exist before you get married, it's not, getting married is not a precursor for that existing. And so I knew leading up that if I didn't follow through, I wouldn't be able to say that I did everything that I could and it was still bad. So I went through with getting married, and we were not even home from our honeymoon, and I knew I had done the wrong thing. And I knew that all the things that I thought it was going to fix were not going to be fixed. And so the numbness on my wedding day was probably a way for me to shut down, actually, like to get through the day without actually experiencing what I should have been feeling. And I literally should have run down the street like Julia Roberts in Runaway Bride. I should have been her. Yeah. Right? But I didn't. And looking back, it's all very well and good to say, I should have, but I wouldn't have. Like, even now, I wouldn't make if I had to relive that, I wouldn't make a different decision, because until I got over the end of that ideal or that precipice that I had set for myself, I was never going to be 100% sure that I had done the wrong thing or the right thing.
Looking back, was that a bad experience or a good experience in looking back? Because we had this discussion in the pre-interview about this sense of gratitude for the challenges in life. So was that a good experience or a bad experience looking back?
That was the most incredible experience, to reassess everything I had thought about my reality up until the age of 24. So it's probably one of the things that I am most grateful for in my life.
Where a lot of people would look back on that and put it on the list of things that have gone wrong in my life, and they identify with that. Instead, it was a catalyst. And where did you go from there? Or like, if it was a catalyst, what was the next stage in your life?
Well, you'd like to think you get immediately smarter, right? Like,
how old were you?
I'm 24.
Well, I mean, what do you know at 20?
Well, I mean, you don't know anything at 24. You think you do. And, adults tell you that all the time when you're 24, and you're like, no, I'm an adult. I can, like, drive a car and drink alcohol. I know all the things.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
you have no idea. And they've lived it, because they've lived up to 24, and they know they had no idea who they were. So I'm 24, and I, think I'm smarter. And I have learned a great deal, but I'm still in that phase of really uncovering everything that I had been through and what that meant as who I am, and then who was underneath all of that, because that was all just excess. It wasn't really who I was. So I meet this other gentleman a little while later, and he's, more mature, and, he's had a divorce, and we connected on that level of like what you go through when you get divorced. Because the thing that I found when I was getting divorced was that unless you were divorced or separated, you couldn't possibly understand what drives you to make that decision. So talking to people that were either long-term married or happily married, they just could not connect with what I was going through. As soon as you walked into a group of people that understood, had been in some kind of separation or divorce situation, it was like we were speaking a completely different language, and we all understood. So him and I connected on this level of like what he'd been through, what I had been through. And, the gentleman I got married to, we were roughly around the same age. So for me, I was like, he's a little bit older. He's, more mature. He's a little bit more successful in his career, thinking that, would fill all the things on the list that I didn't have in my last relationship. And then I was more cognizant of what I contributed. And I will give myself credit, at the 6-month point, I was like, this is not for me and I need to go. And
at 6 months?
6 months in, I knew that was where I needed to, it was perfect timing too, because the house that we were in, we had to get out of it. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to move out by myself. And I was really super proud of myself for that. Uh-huh. But he had a 14-year-old daughter that lived with us, and she came and begged me not to leave her.
Oh.
And I mean, rightly or wrongly, I could not leave her. So then that relationship deteriorated over a significant period of time. And that was probably a more emotional abusive relationship than my marriage had been. But there were a lot of aspects that positive things that my marriage didn't have. So I clung to those to try and, get me through that point. And I had a lot more tools in that relationship than I did before. But at the same time, because I had put myself in that situation again, it was easier for me then to start disappearing. Disappearing. So in that relationship, unbeknownst to me, I started the foundations of an eating disorder, and lived in that relationship for a significant period of time, and then continued that, because honestly, I don't really know how I found the strength to leave that relationship and how I handled myself. I'm not sure where that came from. Somewhere in my feet, I found it. But I still continued the habits of that eating disorder post leaving that relationship, just because I had sort of given up on myself to a degree, but I knew that I couldn't have, because I would have stayed in the relationship if I really had.
when you say disappear, we talked a bit about this, but I even when we talked about it, I wasn't quite clear what was happening for you at the time. Do you know what was happening when you went into this period where you want to be invisible and you cut your hair, I believe?
Yes, I cut all my hair off. I lost, I don't even know how much. I was a really good weight when I got divorced, but I think I lost another 40 pounds. I mean, I weighed $150 wet. Like, I was...
That's roughly about 100 pounds different from when you were younger, because you said you were overweight, so 100 pounds less in total.
And I was never really big, you know, like probably at my biggest, I mean, if I do it in kilos, I think at my heaviest, I was 80 kilos. So I wasn't like significantly obese or anything, but I dropped down to somewhere between 38 and 42 kilos when I was at my skinniest. And I'm nearly 5'10", so that is, right? Like that might be a normal weight for somebody who's 5'5", but at 5'10", you cannot pull off 38 kilos.
So at this time, would you say that that's when the anorexia kicked in, or the part of anorexia nervosa that was there before and manifested itself this way?
So I think that during that time, because going through it, I don't realize I'm trying to disappear. That's a thought that I have after I realize that I even have an eating disorder. That's so in the time that it's sort of I'm creating the foundation for it and feeding it further and further. I am in this place where I just want to be healthy, right? So I use being healthy as an excuse to cut out pretty much anything that would make you gain weight or stimulate your body in any shape or form. So I eat very minimal protein, no carbs, no sugar, no dairy. Pretty much if it's not green and is in a box, I won't eat it. Completely restricted my diet and using the excuse that I was trying to be healthy, which came from a point of control because it was about the only thing that I felt like I had control of in my personal life. And so that kind of then becomes, and because of my personality, like I compete with myself, right? So then when I would get on the scales and I'd start to realize that I had lost weight, it then became a game of like, okay, if I'm 48 kilos today, can I be 47 kilos in the next 3 days? And then if I can I be 46 kilos? Not realizing, because in my head, when I was seeing my reflection, I wasn't unhealthy. I didn't look sickly then. I looked fit and great. Like my brain could tell me that I looked super healthy. That's what I saw. And did not make the correlation between the fact that like if I looked healthy but I continued to lose, 8 or 9 kilos, that I couldn't possibly still look the same as I was in the mirror because I had lost 9 more kilos. That thought never even crossed my mind. They were two completely different entities. The scale was a game and the reflection was a positive refraction of what I didn't truly look like.
Would you have described that as body dysmorphia at the time?
I would. At the time, I don't realize it. I do not realize any of this until, so to give a time frame, I'm sort of in that position somewhere between 2 and 3.5 years. I have this condition. And I'm still in that relationship. I leave that relationship and I'm still playing this game with myself, still restricting my food based on how healthy it is. And then looking back, I was also playing a game about like productivity versus food. So I was running a company and starting my own company, and eating during the day then became 15 minutes of productivity that I would lose. I would go, oh, you're hungry? No, don't worry about it. Do this other thing. The thing that I would set myself would take an hour and a half. So then, it's 4 o'clock. There's no point eating anything now because I usually eat dinner at 6 o'clock. So then I would find something else to do to get me through till 6 o'clock. And then I would eat at 6 o'clock. And then that would be my only meal for the day. And that meal was severely restricted. Like it was usually some kind of vegetable and a protein in a very small bowl. And that was all I would eat. And playing that game made if somebody said to me, oh, you don't eat, I'd be like, well, no, I don't intentionally not eat. I'm just super busy. I would have an answer for everybody's concern because I had hidden it beneath all of these things. And I was not concerned about myself, you know, like I had felt sick for so long leading up to that, felt healthy. I had like, so even if I'd taken a backslide in my physical performance or my cognitive aptitude, I felt so much better than I had, you know, 8 years before, riddled with disease. So I didn't feel like, on my scale of like feeling good to terrible, I was still feeling really good. And so then I remember if we're going to the point where I start to realize that I have done all of this to myself, because I do not realize that I've been doing this. I don't realize that cutting my hair is part of a way to not, you know, get attention or draw attention to myself in any shape or form. I don't realize that losing weight is the same. I'm trying to do the same thing. But I was like internally, because I had left myself in a situation that made me feel small, and I had chosen to feel small to survive that situation, my body was then reflecting how small I thought and how little I thought of myself. And so coming out of that relationship, I was single for 2.5 years. And I remember traveling around to see friends and family and things like that. I used to get really annoyed at myself because I would pack, and I'm a minimal packer. I do not like to pack, you know, 5 extra outfits. This is what I'm wearing for each thing. That's it. So I remember going to a christening for my girlfriend's first child, and I had packed this outfit, and I put the outfit on, and I was like, oh, I feel disgusting in this outfit. I feel like I've put on 5 kilos since I packed my bag. Like, I feel like it's tight and it's clinging to me, but I have nothing else to wear. And I felt terrible going to this christening because I didn't feel good in what I was wearing. And fast forward a year later, I'm in a much healthier place mentally, and I start to realize that, you know, I don't start to realize, I start to eat a little bit more and things like that. And I happen to find a photo of me at that event. And I look at the photo. The outfit that I had been complaining about being too tight was literally falling off my body.
Wow.
Like, it was 2 sizes too big.
You didn't see that at the time, looking at yourself in the mirror.
I did not see that at the time. And that was the catalyst with like, hold on a second, something is very, very wrong here. Because I specifically remember how I felt wearing that and what I thought to myself wearing that. And that was where I started to realize that what I had been seeing in the mirror, and even what I saw in the mirror, was not the truth of where I was. And so from that kind of, it was very, very weird, because it was like watching what I had convinced myself I was looking at in the mirror fade into what I actually looked like. The more I convinced myself that what I was seeing, like, I would stand in front of the mirror and say, okay, well, what you think you're seeing is not true, so I want to see the truth, right? And so I could slowly see myself as I was sort of represented in photos. And so then I was like, okay, well, you have to start eating something, because this is not, we cannot continue to do this. So, you know, when you don't eat for so long, you have to sort of retrain your body to be hungry, and there's all kinds of dynamics. So I would eat 6 very small meals a day. Now, doing that for a week, my brain, because of the way I had conditioned it, which is don't eat, be thin, as soon as I started putting 6 small meals in my body a day, my brain went, oh, you're now 400 pounds. Like, I'd never been that heavy in my life, but that is what I would see in the mirror. So, but I knew that wasn't true, and I knew how much power my mind had based on, you know, either what I was protecting myself from or what I didn't want to admit to myself at that time. And so I knew that I had to see something different. So what I would do is I would look at other women and go, okay, I would relatively estimate I'm the same size as her. You know, I'd look in a magazine and go, I'd relatively estimate, and not in an unhealthy way, not in a way like I was like, oh, I need to be that thin. It was actually the healthiest exercise I've ever done in my life as far as understanding body, because I would be like, okay, she is fit and healthy, and I am probably not quite as fit and healthy looking as her. Or, you know, she's the same height as me, and I would probably have the same shoulder width or hip width. Or so then I had anchors for what my brain should be seeing based on the truth that I knew in my body, or the size I was. You know, I used the size of clothing that I would buy as a gauge as to whether or not I was sort of in that healthier range for my body type, and the scales to kind of gauge that as well. But I did try and avoid the scales because I was a little bit scared I'd start getting into the same game. Well, oh, you're this weight, can you get down again? So that then I created a healthier perception or a yardstick or an idea of what I was actually seeing. And it was funny how quickly that 400-pound woman disappeared and came back into alignment with the truth of the size of that I actually was.
We talked before a lot about perception, and that's part of the thread, the theme here. What helped you change your perception of, I feel like, 400 pounds? As you said, you started looking at other women, you started looking at old pictures of yourself, but looking back, what was that shift? What happened there?
I knew that the best thing about that situation was that my brain decided to take it too far, right? So like I knew that there is no physical way that I could have put on 400 pounds in 2 weeks.
Oh, your mind challenged it.
Yeah, right. So I challenged what I was looking at. And had I been doing that the whole time, then I would have realized what I was actually seeing and not what I thought I was seeing. And so it was and challenging my perception or my perspective is something I learnt from my marriage. It's just I never applied it to my the connection of my physical perception of myself. Mm-hmm. I connected it to relationships or how I worked in business or other people's opinions or forming my own opinion of something externally for myself, but I had never used it as a tool just for me. And so it was super interesting to learn how to challenge my own perception and my own mind about myself in that way. And that has served me well long term because I now use it when I think I can't do something. I'm like, well, can you not? I mean, you thought you were 400 pounds and you weren't. So I've used that tool in a lot of other ways. But yes, it was the fact that my brain took it too far and tried to tell me that I was 400 pounds when I physically knew that that was impossible in such a short period of time.
Later on in your life, well, it started at that time, but later on you were able to apply this to business. And I know this isn't, an episode of podcast about business, but one thing that you were talking about is that you had the ability to look at other people's businesses and yours and how to break through barriers, finding out what is possible in the impossible. So was this the origin of that then?
Ironically, that started while I was married.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
So ironically, you see the world, the thing that you need from the world, and usually the thing that you're driven to fix or create or do is something that you need for yourself, which is what happened with my companies being the catalyst for all the things that I needed to grow into a different, not even a different version, the version of myself that I should have been if I hadn't conditioned myself from an external perspective.
The true version, would you say?
I mean, using the word true is kind of murky because I don't believe that, I don't believe anything is true and concrete and fast. Everything is fluid.
I was interested in your thoughts on that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's always three sides to every story. And I actually believe there's more than three sides to any story. It just depends what day it is and what perception you're using and whose glasses you're wearing. And so I don't necessarily believe that I have, or I had a true version of myself. I believe that I had, for lack of a better word, an untouched version of myself. And instead of, and we're not conditioned to do this, our society does not even preempt it, and trying to undo it already catapults us into a design of being selfish. Once if you do anything for yourself, then you become selfish. And there's, again, the truth in that there's multiple facets of, selfishness and what you do for yourself and why. But my journey feels like to me that I had a center and I had a way of who I was, and young, I knew who that was. Instead of using that to inform what I saw in my reality, I used the external environment that I was within and the feedback that I was getting as a yardstick to define myself. So I basically defined myself based on external parameters, and those parameters were not particularly healthy or nice. And this is the thing that you don't realize when you're this little, like everybody's living in the world and just projecting all their crap on each other, right? And so there's no filter for this is true or this is not true. This is the situation, and it's everybody's way of interacting in the world. And so I lived my life under the guise of those expectations, those definitions for such a long time, that through all of the experiences that I've had, I've slowly been able to decipher what was mine, what was an external perception or a conditioning that I utilized to define myself, and then how I remove that or connect with something that feels more true to me rather than an external perception.
It sure seems that looking at it from this way, that there's a lot of conditioning, but also there's a lot of templates out there. As you described, the template of at a certain point in your life, you should get married and have kids and things like that. What other limiting templates do we see now for men and women that imposes this? Okay, this is what you should be and who you should be and how you identify.
I don't necessarily think that there's not a place in the world that you don't find that. I think that under every nook and cranny, because the thing is, it's human nature to not understand, to fear something we don't understand, right? So to ensure that we don't walk around just terrified of everything, we have to name it or label it or give it a definition. And the one thing that traveling, like to the extent that I have traveled to and meeting so many different people, is you realize that even though you think you have the same word and the same definition, even the definition of the same word can be completely different based on how it has been used in somebody's history and the environment they grew up. And so then that becomes an understanding for even the labels that we have don't actually create a cohesive pattern for anybody. And one label can create safety for somebody else and fear for another person. And so then you start to realize that they are not as necessary as they are. And you then, in turn, start to lose the labels on yourself. And that can be a very freeing experience, because once you start realizing how complex you are as a person, as a human being, and the way how complex the world is, like it's not as simple. I mean, I spent most of my life thinking that the world was black and white. It was pretty simple. It was this or that.
Oh, that's the Western thought.
Right, absolutely. And, my family didn't know any different than that. They grew up in that. So that's what they taught us. And when you I have a lot of respect for that and a lot of respect for what I learned. And I appreciate that there's certain behaviors that needs to suit, or situations that create a unity or an understanding. But even in having those conversations with people that I have grown up with, we're still speaking two different languages, even though we're using the same words, because the way I define a word and the way anyone in my family defines a word, again, is different, because I was fairly intellectual and read a lot and, had dictionary definitions for every other thing. And there, those definitions and the way things were utilized. I mean, it wasn't until I had nieces or nephews that I realized that duffer is actually a very insulting word.
I'm not even aware of that name.
Right. So we used to, growing up, like my grandparents would say it to us, my parents would say it to us, we'd say it to each other. When you did something silly, somebody would be like, oh my God, you're such a duffer. Like you're kind of like a goose, like you're, and I happened to be reading a book. Don't ask me why I was reading 1,200 words you need to know the definition of. That's literally the name of the book. And duffer was in the book. And the definition for duffer is actually very insulting. So I'm like, nobody's calling anybody that anymore. Like, we're not calling the children that. We're not. But it was so harmless to us because our definition was jovial and silly and in jest. Mm-hmm. Now I can't say it. I can't call anybody that because I know how insulting it is.
It's so fascinating how we not only have these templates and the conditioning in that, but like you said, the words and the meaning and the difference between one person and another having a meaning to that word, and countries. But when you mention about this word, which I've never heard before, is it an Australian word or is it just
I am not sure. It could be British. It could be old school British. I am actually not sure where the heritage.
There's a lot of words that are similar, but I get it.
I mean, my family was the only people that would ever know what it was, so I'm not sure where it came from. But if I said it to somebody outside of my family, they'd be like, "What are you talking about?" Just like you're like, "I've never heard of this word." What?
The word goof is an interesting word and how we use goof. Working with people that came from the corrections system that I work with in addiction, it was very, very clear that even though, same country, same, conditioning that we have, the word goof in jail or in prisons is probably the worst thing. Goof is a benign word, don't be so goofy, or, you goofed up, right? It was very, very clear that for some reason, don't know why, within the prison system, the word goof would probably be worse than any other, like, four-letter word or any denigrating way that you can say something to another person in prison.
Yeah, great example.
That we identify with words, we identify with these templates and conditioning out there. And I can see where this understanding about the conditioning and the templates that we have kind of helped you be more flexible later on in life. But if I could rewind a bit, in a lot of cases with anorexia, and I'm no expert, but as a therapist working with people with anorexia and bulimia and other eating disorders, that often trauma is part of the mix. Was that part of your story as well when you were younger?
So probably not in my youngest time. So my marriage, there was a component of sexual abuse to that relationship. And I mean, again, things that you don't know. I did not realize that there was even, and I'm even sure he didn't realize that he was sexually abusing me, right? But it wasn't until I had a very random conversation with somebody where they explained to me what marital rape was. And I was like, oh, that's like, I am actually allowed to say no, actually allowed to get physically defensive of myself, even though we're in a long-term relationship, we're engaged, we're married, all of those things. So, but I truly believe that he didn't realize that that's what he was doing either. Like, we were so young when we got married. If I don't like to use the idea that I was smarter than him, but I was more, intellectually evolved than he was. So if I didn't know what that was, I very much doubted that he knew what that was. So I think when younger, pre him, I was the tallest girl in the grade for most of my schooling. I was usually picked on for being, tall or something random. I hit high school, and, despite having never kissed anybody, I was automatically the school slut. Then you go into, a semi-sexually abusive relationship. So I think to a degree, all of those things create or perpetuate a sort of self-attack on your physical appearance, which is why I mentioned earlier that I cut all my hair off and things like that, because that for me, in the world, being nearly 5'9", some semblance of attractive, all of those things create attention. And so if I remove myself of the nice figure and the long hair and all of those things, I just begin to blend with everybody else, and I don't draw attention to myself. And so, yes, I think that there is I don't necessarily think the sexual trauma started it. I think it becomes a disassociation with owning just how I am built physically and who I am physically. And that definitely perpetuates a huge gap between understanding that how I think and my physical self are not connected, even though they are, because despite all of that time where I thought one thing and my physical self was projecting another thing, I still didn't realize that everything I thought was infecting my body in some way.
And thank you for sharing that. Sometimes it's difficult to talk about those painful things, but I understand how that tied in. Often with anorexia, and I'm thinking about people that are listening, the healthcare profession often talks about that. It's something develops where the restricting, for example, in anorexia is part of an ability to have a sense of order, a sense of control over their lives. Do you relate to that, or do you think that's not true of anorexia?
I think that is too blatant a way to understand how many levels of control. Like, so, for example, when somebody hears, like, you restrict your food to have a control in your life, yes, that's definitely what happens, but I actually think it's not the one thing that you can control in a massive or sea of external influences that are uncontrollable. I think it actually, in my case, had far more to do with controlling myself than it did. And so, like, if I was meek and mild and small, then I could control the space that I took up, and I could control the perception other people had of me.
I see.
Now, it didn't matter how anorexic I was or how much my hair was cut off. I still got attention. That's still, and I still worked in a high profile job. I was still, I still had to command a room. It was a complete juxtaposition of two things. Like, you couldn't be more trying to disappear and put yourself in a situation you have to be seen and heard. At the time I didn't think of it. And, being seen and heard wasn't actually as much of a problem for me as I was trying to convince myself that it was. It was just that I wouldn't, to me at the time, being seen and heard was very different from my own self-worth and my own self-value, the opinion that I had of myself. So, I somehow was able, again, let's go back to labels, because labels are a big way that we create resistance in our body between our mental, emotional, and physical being. So I would be able to be strong and in the front row at work because it was my job, and I could step into this role of being a general manager and owner of a company. But in my personal life, I didn't have so many labels. My labels then reverted back to, I was... I don't like the word victim, but something was happening to me that I wasn't necessarily okay with or wasn't in my best interest, despite the fact that I was choosing to continue to be in that situation. And so those labels run rife, and they're all negative, self-fulfilling ideas of who you are.
Yes.
And the more you chip away, and I think that was something else about disappearing, was that the more I chipped away at who I was, the skinnier I got too.
So the restricting, not necessarily about control, but the restricting ended up that you had more control over yourself.
Yes, I had more control over my perception.
Your perception of yourself, yeah.
Yes, and because at the time that was negative, and this could go down a huge rabbit hole, but, food is fuel, food for your body, it keeps your body healthy, keeps your body, in tune and in check. And so, if you want to go all the layers, depriving myself of things that would be good, and controlling myself in that way also was a negative reinforcement or additional negative reinforcement of the situation and that I was in and the perception of myself I had in my head. So I was then controlling the narrative further that I was less than and, had to justify existing. And, the list of those things goes on and on, and one feeds the next. But it wasn't necessarily, on the surface level, you could see it as a control in a situation of uncontrollable stimuli, but it was more than that. The level of control that feeds it is more than just, I need one thing in my life to control. You need to be controlling yourself, and what stimulates how you control yourself is the way you perceive yourself.
Would you agree that there's different types of perception? We have the perception of self, we have the perception of others, and we have the perception of the world. Does that make sense to you?
That we should have that.
We should have that. Yeah.
We should have that. What we have in modern day society, particularly in the West, is most of us have a blended idea of what all of those are and use one to inform the other when that's not necessarily the case.
You do a lot of traveling in your work. You're, I think the word I saw on LinkedIn or somewhere is a traveling entrepreneur. You spend a majority of your time traveling. So you have the opportunity to meet people that have lived a different context than say, we have here in Canada or you had in Australia. What do you see as the difference in their perceptions? Are there any countries or cultures that seem to have a more realistic perception of themselves in the world?
I wouldn't use the word realistic. And before I say any of this, I'm going to preface this as my experience in Australia would have been very different than a lot of people's experience of Australia. So, I traveled, we moved a lot when I was a child. So I lived in 4 different states before I was 10 years old. And we were naturally, I was born in Australia. My family was born in Australia. I don't have any immediate immigrant parents or family. So there are a lot of different perceptions, even in the one country of that, the country and the idea of the West. And I know that from the simple fact, the gentleman I was married to, he was Italian. He had, grandparents that had immigrated here. They didn't speak English. Some of his aunties and uncles were born in Italy. So then I kind of had a very multicultural surround when I was younger. So you can see that I could already see back then the different perspectives that we all had of the same situation, the same country, the same idea of the Western culture, and how much that changes. Now that I've been to Europe, how much the Western culture actually dilutes some of that European culture that comes, that immigrates over as well. Because, I thought I knew everything about the idea of Italians. I basically grew up speaking Italian, eating Italian food. That was so normal. Every friend that I ever had was Italian. And then I go to Italy and I'm like, hold on a second, this is nothing like the families that I grew up with. And so their culture adapts and changes and takes what it does and doesn't like from the West. And then they kind of live in this mismatched world of both, I suppose, or different. And so that was super interesting. I did find that really interesting, how their perception of their own culture changed once integrated with another culture too. And I don't necessarily think that anybody has a better grasp on reality than anybody else. I definitely think that throughout Europe there are cultures, and it's more prevalent that people have more confidence or respect for themselves because of the way that they grew up than we do in the West. There's not as much shaming when it comes to ideas of body conscious. And I say that quite loosely too, because you have, if you want to be a model in Milan Fashion Week, you have to be nearly 5'11" and itty bitty. So that's not necessarily true in all facets. But they're a lot more relaxed about their physical identity. There's something that's super noticeable, particularly with women over there, is that there's not as much excess. So there's not as much makeup. If you walk down the street, there's probably 1 or 2 in 10 that are wearing a full face of makeup during the day. Whereas if you were in Australia in a similar area, it'd be the 1 of 2 women that weren't wearing a full face of makeup. There's not as much, if you go to Miami, for example, everybody's half naked and wearing bodycon dresses, where if you go to the south of France, people are wearing nothing.
Yes, very true. True. I've been there for a couple of years now, and yes, I agree. Yeah.
It's very interesting, the degrees to which we're so different, the West, the East culture, and then the middle ground that we kind of cross over in the same way. And I don't think that, I don't necessarily think that I have a better grasp of reality than anybody else in the world either. I think that we're all, the one difference between having a grasp on something more than what we're conditioned to have is understanding that the complexity. I use this question a lot when I work with people. Is why is green green?
Yes, I've thought of that before too.
right? Who said green was green?
Right.
Why did, like, my girlfriend and I always, whenever we go shopping together, she's like, that's black. And I'm like, no, it's not. It is like 50 shades of blue. Like it's some kind of navy, right? And she's like, no, it's absolutely black. And then we always make a game of it and ask the clerk, like, what the color's supposed to be. And they're like, oh, it's blue. But who said that I'm right and she's wrong? Like, she thinks it's black and I think it's blue. What difference does that make? And so I think we need to become a little bit more relaxed with the ideas of like concreteness and need for that concreteness. But the problem with that is we then seek a sense of control. And so do we all end up with anorexia or some kind of addiction or
I was going to say, addiction for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I think the biggest thing in any society, because I have seen it traveling no matter where I am, is the idea of fear of not knowing or having an outcome bias to any one given thing. And then what the tools that we don't have to cope with when the outcome bias becomes a negative experience.
What winding down here, and I love to go on about perception, and I purposely put that out there about truth. If there's truth in perception, and is there other cultures that have a better handle on it? But I appreciate the response to that. But winding down, I want to touch on that, and I can relate to this in my life, where the worst things in my life were horrible at the time, hard to understand at the time. But looking back, I don't think I would be where I am today. I don't think I would have worked on myself and all the emotional intelligence that developed over the years from my addiction when I was younger. So I do look back with gratitude. We spoke about this on the phone. What type of gratitude do you have for what part of your life in the past? What events at the time were the worst thing, but looking back were the best things that happened to you?
I mean, all of it is the best thing.
Yeah.
I honestly have, I can't remember when around 29, 30, I started saying to people when they ask me questions like that, I would say, like, life always takes me where I need to be. It doesn't necessarily take me where I think I want to be, but where I need to be. And it, no matter how traumatic somebody else would think that things that have happened to me are, I don't see them that way. And I was a believer, used to be a believer in the idea that everything happens for a reason. Everything does happen for a reason, but there's a caveat. The reason is what you choose for it to be, right? So it doesn't just happen for this non-existent reason. I mean, everything that's happened in my life, I had a choice of what I was going to use that for or do with that experience. And so they all happen for a reason. If I had made another choice, do I sit here and have this conversation with you, or do I, does that look entirely different? Right. And so I think that life is an opportunity for you to find what you are going to make of anything. And so in that sense, I can't be grateful for one thing and not another. I have to be grateful for it all. Even the worst parts, even the parts that like seemed to me like they were insignificant and I can't understand why I had to deal with it or went through it. Those things I'm grateful for too, because, I know from experience, 5 years later, that sucker will come up and you'll be like, I'm so glad that I had that, 15 minutes of like impatient, uncomfortable something, right? Because I actually needed that. All right. Yeah. Or looking back and thinking, had I not done that, I wouldn't have learnt the thing that I need to learn here. And this thing that was way more important it went off without a hitch because I had that small amount of discomfort, 5 years ago or 3 months ago or whatever it is. So I also think that people, the most immediate recency bias, and the most recent thing is always the worst thing, but I don't believe that that's ever the case. Like I have, unless you keep choosing, to self, deteriorate. I mean, I could probably have dropped dead if I had not realized that I was struggling with a eating disorder. But if you're trying to progress, you're trying to do something else, the worst thing is usually something far in the past. But because you coping with something in the moment, it becomes the worst thing. And like an exercise that you can use to wade through whatever you're going through right now is sort of thinking back to like the worst thing that ever really truly happened to you and measuring it against what you're experiencing now. I mean, I remember when I left my husband about 2 weeks after I got divorced, I went horse riding, and I love horse riding, but I got this stubborn horse and he wouldn't move and he wouldn't do anything. I remember sitting on his back going, oh my God, I just got divorced. I just did the hardest thing in my life. This should not be hard. It was like, are you okay? And I'm like, I am good. If the horse moves, we're fine. But in that moment, I thought to myself, this is so hard. And then I thought to myself, it's actually really not, because everything that I've been through in the last year was way harder than this horse not moving. But we have a tendency, like the most recent, the most current thing is got to be the worst possible thing. And I bet you can find somewhere in your history something, small or otherwise, that was possibly harder than whatever it is that you're facing right now.
The worst things that happened to me pretty well forced me to look at my self-perception, look at the self-harm that was going on in my life with alcohol and drugs. And I certainly, looking back, realized that without being forced to do that, then I wouldn't have the life I have today. So most definitely when, you break a shoelace or whatever, these small things that really piss me off, it's in the grand scheme of things and looking back, it's nothing to be too concerned about. And that this whole story, what you're sharing with us today, is about resilience, and we can find the resilience in our past. Lastly, I saw two quotes. I saw a quote on your LinkedIn, and I saw a quote on your website. So to wrap up, I'm going to ask you why these quotes were important to you.
Just so everybody knows, this was not part of the pre-interview.
No, it was. It was.
I have not been teed up for this. I don't have a hairpin in the back pocket of my jeans that I can get out of these handcuffs. He's literally going to make me sweat over this. Okay, give me your best.
I won't put you on the spot. I think if the quotes were important to you, and this is what spoke to me, is that it's interesting. I really like that quote. There must be a reason why you posted that, or the reason why that you believe in that quote. So from Nora Roberts, she said, "Things don't always stay the same in life." What does that mean?
I actually love this quote, and it was actually a line from one of her books that I read, I cannot tell you how many years ago. But for me, this sums up the fluidity of life, the complexity that it has, and it is kind of the combat to our idea of fear that we were talking about earlier. Like, we see the unknown, we see change in our lives and things like that, but everything is forever changing. The weather changes, the tide changes, sea levels change. Like Mother Nature is forever changing, and we as humans are forever changing, whether we want to admit that or not. And society is forever changing. And I think that quote from Nora Roberts was the epitome of that change can be a good thing, and it's our perception of what that change does and doesn't look like that defines the experience that we have of it.
Even the Buddhist philosophy ties in there that accept, that's what it is. Accept that things do not always stay the same in life, in the way that everything is impermanent. But we have this expectation that, things will always stay the same. And then when things change, then that disrupts everything and causes suffering. But the Buddhist philosophy is in there for sure, is to accept that things are impermanent.
And I think too that it comes back to your mind-body connection too, because as one evolves, the other changes. So I know that the more work that I've done on myself, and I don't. If anyone's listening to this and thinking, oh, there's like a point that you reach where you're like fully something that you've reached the end goal. I don't know. For me, I don't believe there is an end goal. I believe that life is a complete cycle of, competing with yourself and being better than you were, 10 years ago, or what you want to be. Like, would you look back from 10 years from now and go, oh, I did a bunch of things I never thought I could? But I think that the more that you stand in the ideal of yourself and what your life could look like for you as an individual, the healthier your body starts to become. And that's reflected. The happier you are, they always say like women that look young, and that's because they're happy. And that is true. I've actually, when I was 25, everybody used to think I was 35 because of, and I can tell now, based on what I was going through, I probably did look like a little bit of a haggard old lady for my age. And now I'm 34 and I frequently get 28. If people were going to guess my age, I usually get somewhere between 28 and 30. Whereas, 10 years ago, people were giving me 8 or 9 years on my age. So I definitely think that, your perception of change, your perception of fluidity, and your fluidity, your individual fluidity too, does impact your physical self.
I also would add humor, right? We've had quite a few laughs and it was very enjoyable, but reminds me how important that part is,
Absolutely.
And I have read that somewhere. I'm not sure if it's a statistic, but I heard somewhere where, if you laugh every day, if you find a sense of humor in things and it's the whole physical mind and body experience that you have with laughter, that it can show physically on someone. You can see that. You can see laugh lines and things like that. So that definitely ties in with that.
I mean, they do say laughter is the best medicine.
Oh, for sure.
So if you do it in advance, you're never sick.
True enough. Right. Laughter is preventative.
Productivity. Excellent. I love that. I also, because I'm not a great meditator, I like meditation and I like all the Eastern education around meditating and what you get from things like that. But I'm just not the person that's going to sit on a cushion and for 25 minutes. So I had to work out how I was going to meditate in my life so that it felt natural and comfortable to me and was easily accessed. And I do always make the reference that laughing is my meditation, because if you set me off enough, I can be on one for 5 minutes, just hysterical. I cannot talk, cannot breathe. And there can't be any more cathartic experience than crying really hard or laughing really hard.
Well, to back that up, in Toronto, the Dalai Lama came and gave a talk. And my wife and I went there. And the one thing that was evident in my takeaway is that this guy laughs a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Even the serious questions he was having a giggle and laughing about. Okay, so here's the last quote.
Okay.
Won't put you in the spot.
You are fine. I'm actually enjoying this. It's good. You picked a good one, because I was like, oh, what's he going to pick? But that's a good one. I do like that quote.
How about the quote from Ennis? Fortune favors the brave.
I do love this too.
Why?
One, because I think that it has been applied in a lot of contexts where it's not necessarily the crux of what Ennis was saying. And I also think that it comes with an idea of showboating. So, like fortune favors the brave. I think in modern society, we think that you've got to do this big, huge, bold thing out in the world and you will, have more money or have more success or be famous or things like that. And I think that's tied to that grandiose idea. But for me, being brave is leaving a marriage, have no idea what that's going to look like, or having grace when you have to bury your child well before the years that you should have, overcoming addiction. I think those things are brave, like being stubborn and then realizing that you're stubborn and choosing a different reaction and a different response in a situation. That is brave, like being able to sit in front of the mirror and say that you're not the person that you think you are and you're something more than that. That's brave. And I think that, if you're looking at your life, you will have a more fortunate life. You will have a more successful life. You will have more in your life just by those small acts of bravery and recognizing that they're brave, that there is favor in that.
Your success is inspiring. When I was, looking into your website and LinkedIn, but also other things that have been said about you. But one thing that really was impressive is that, you can maybe speak about it, is that SME, I'm not quite sure what that stands for, but your company, Carat, was one of the top SME businesses of the year. And this was a recent thing that happened?
Yes.
This year?
Yes. So SME means small to medium-sized enterprises.
I see. Okay.
Yes. So we were named a small to medium-sized business of the year for our consulting and business services work through that. Although it's not the only thing that company does, it's usually one that gets most recognized because everybody likes business awards. And we're very grateful to get it. But a lot of the work that we do, and again, to link it to this conversation, is just better practices. We like to come in and create different changed ecosystems for companies. And there is fortune in being brave and not following suit and templates, as you mentioned earlier, or labels. And so what we've had in this discussion today, my life experiences, they've all led to understanding, where the parameters are, how we're adhering to the parameters, and then how we can sort of break those open and consider something more than what is in front of us.
Absolutely. We talked a lot about gratitude. I have a lot of gratitude that you reached out to us and wanted to share your life experiences and your journey. And I do believe that the listeners have benefited from hearing your personal story.
I have a lot of gratitude for your platform and for having me. So thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you. Thank you. And you definitely helped us see the mind and body connection from different types of angles. So much appreciated. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
I'll tell you, that Australian accent's a little contagious.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you heard, but there were some times where I almost went into that accent.
Boy, does she ever have a hearty laugh too?
Yes, absolutely.
and what a journey it's been. What's my takeaway from hearing her story?
Right. Yeah.
The big word that would come out of this episode of Mind Body Matters would be perception.
Yes.
I think that's the biggest, for me anyway, the biggest takeaway from this interview today is about perception. She was talking about fitting into some clothes, and then she went back to see these pictures a couple of years later or something, and her clothes were just falling off of her. Okay.
No, I agree. Perception, as they say, is perception is reality, but her subjective opinion about herself in the mirror, I've heard that quite a bit with the clients I work with that have an eating disorder, is they don't see it and they continue to restrict and reduce because they see themselves as fat. But my takeaway was that it kind of makes sense, and it's unfortunate that someone very young that doesn't want to be noticed, doesn't want attention shown to them, that they want to disappear, so much so that you would cut your hair and restrict your intake and lose weight in an effort to be invisible and
to disappear. Yes.
To disappear. And for her to come from that and then become a business person and an entrepreneur, I can see where the strength that she gained by thinking outside of the box, thinking about, okay, what can I do to, improve my journey and deal with the past and get past it. I think she's using that and building it into the consultant work that she's doing with businesses, having them look at things differently, not so much subjectively, but also objectively. So perhaps the perception in her clients now is something that she focuses on. So yeah, absolutely, Rob. That's
my biggest takeaway is just
I agree.
And we can look at that with everybody in life. Like, what's the old phrase? The grass always looks greener from the other side of the fence or something like that.
Right. And
but it's your perception. It's your perception.
Yeah, absolutely. And in all seriousness, another takeaway was learning the word duffer.
Oh, well, and it's funny because I've done some work with the correctional system, and you had mentioned about the word goof.
Yes.
Yes. Now,
you notice that too. That's a bad word. Yeah.
Oh, it's in the prison and correctional system. Goof or doofus. You don't use but it was the first time I ever heard of duffer.
I know. Me too.
You're a duffer.
Yeah. Right back at you. You're a duffer as well, Rob.
We don't even know what it really means, but
It's bad.
today you're a duffer anyway.
Yeah.
But in a nice way. But no,
And seriously, yeah.
It was great to have her on the show.
What an accomplished person. You know, there's more to her career that she didn't mention or I didn't mention. But if you want to look up her website, it's incredible what she's doing. She's working with, Fortune 500 companies and helping them look at what they're missing with, their lack of perception. So nice to have this interview with her. Next week, we're going to interview ourselves as we do on Keep Talking.
How are we going to do that?
Someone has to ask the questions and someone has to answer them.
Okay, so what's my part in this? Am I asking questions or am I answering them? Or we're interviewing ourselves. Not quite following you here.
Then again, we can prepare for our Keep Talking episodes and say we're going to do this and that, but we never do. We just start rambling, and hopefully people will actually listen to these things. But Keep Talking is a segment that we have in between the MindBody Matters podcast episodes where Rob and I talk about whatever's going through our minds, and sometimes it's pretty crowded up there.
Yes, it can be pretty crowded.
I think for you, I think what's up there is like a very cluttered attic. That's what I think, and to sift through that, no wonder it takes so long for us to do these episodes.
And it smells musty up here.
You probably have mothballs up there too, eh?
Oh, now it's funny. It's funny you bring up mothballs because I'm not sure if everyone knows what
here we go,
mothballs are.
Another half hour.
Back when I was a kid, I did. That's a smell I'll never forget. Is
exactly
mothballs. Thanks for pointing that out. Anyway, next week on the show, what's going on?
I don't know. We'll talk about whatever's going on at the time, but we will be back next week, and I'm sure there'll be some kind of subject we'll figure out.
All right. I look forward to that.
Me too.
Going back to my cluttered attic now. Have yourself a good week. We'll see you next week.
Be sure to like and follow us on all social media. And if you like what you hear, hit subscribe, download, and share with your friends. MindBody Matters is a great media production.